From the star bridge of the Union of Earth vessel Vanguard, the stars looked different. Captain Elijah Nazarenko had been watching the endless dance of light in the dark void for 3 hours now. Here, on the edge of human space, everything was calm, far too calm for his liking. Elijah was a tall man with gray at his temples and weary eyes that had seen too many battles. Born in Toronto, he was a distant descendant of Ukrainians who had fled to Canada in the early 21st century, escaping the genocide carried out by the Russian Empire in the occupied regions. He had made a career in the Starfleet and for 15 years had commanded patrol ships, keeping peace across the outer colonies. Most days were spent scanning and hauling cargo, and that suited him just fine. Captain called Lieutenant Kira Magpie from the communication station. Her voice cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. "I've picked up something strange on the emergency bands." Elijah turned away from the viewport and walked toward her console. His boots thudded softly against the metal deck. Kira was young, barely 20, with short chestnut hair and piercing green eyes. She had joined his crew just 6 months ago, fresh from the academy. "What do you mean, strange?" Elijah asked, leaning over her shoulder to look at the screen. Kira's fingers danced across the control panel, adjusting signal filters and frequencies. "The source is far beyond the frontier, really far. And the language? Our systems can't identify it. At first, only the crackle of static came from the speakers. Then, a voice, high and melodic. It spoke in tones that sounded like a song woven with whispers. After a few seconds, the universal translator came online, breaking the alien speech into fragmented English words. "We beg you, travelers among the stars, we have heard of your kind, of the people who walk between worlds." A chill ran down Elijah's spine. First contact situations were never to be taken lightly. There were protocols to follow, reports to file. But something in that voice made him freeze. There was fear in it, genuine, raw fear. The transmission went on, pushing through space across impossible distances. "Our people face extinction. The Scourge Empire comes, with ships that blot out our suns. We offer all that we have, our art, our knowledge, our souls. If you can show mercy to a dying race." Kira's eyes widened as she glanced at him. "Captain, it's coming from the Seraphim system. That's almost 350 light years away. How could they even know about us?" Elijah rubbed his chin, thinking hard. Humanity had explored the stars for 70 years, but had encountered only a handful of alien species, most either friendly traders or isolationists who wanted nothing to do with Earth. But everyone had heard of the Scourge Empire. They brought only death and ruin. Essentially, they were insectoids, giant, hive-minded creatures that had learned to build starships and wage war. They consumed everything in their path, turning entire worlds into resource farms. Intelligence reports claimed they had wiped out at least 5 civilizations in the past 2 decades. "Keep recording everything," Elijah ordered, "and send a top priority message to Earth High Command. They need to hear this." The alien voice returned, now faint and broken by distance and interference. "We are the Lumina. For thousands of years, we have watched the stars in peace. But peace means nothing to those who bring only death. Please, if there is compassion in your hearts, remember us when we are gone." Then the transmission cut off, dissolving into static. Elijah stood still for a long moment, staring at the communications panel. Kira was already typing up the report to command, her fingers flying over the keys. The rest of the bridge crew had heard everything. They all understood what it meant. 2 days later, Elijah found himself in the high-security conference chamber of Earth Command. The hall lay deep beneath the surface, shielded by layers of armor and electromagnetic screens. Seated across the long metal table was Fleet Admiral Eva Morozovsky. She was a stern woman of about 50, with short gray hair and scars on her forearms, souvenirs from her days as a ship's engineer. "Tell me about that transmission again, Captain Nazarenko," Admiral Morozovsky said in a tone that brooked no argument. Elijah brought up a holographic display in the middle of the table. The alien broadcast played once more, the same melodic voice begging across the stars. When it ended, silence fell over the room. Morozovsky tapped her fingers against the table. "Intelligence confirms the Scourge are moving that way. A full military fleet, perhaps 300 ships. They'll reach the Seraphim system in roughly 6 weeks." "And what do we know about the Lumina?" Elijah asked. "Do we know anything about them?" Morozovsky pulled up additional data. Long-range sensor readings and intercepted communications scrolled into view. "Peaceful species," the file said. "No standing army. They make art and study philosophy. In all recorded history, there has been no war." Elijah studied the images. The Lumina looked almost human, but taller and more slender. Their skin had a pale blue tint, their eyes large and expressive. Their cities were works of art, architecture that seemed to grow out of the landscape rather than be built upon it. "They won't last 5 minutes against the Scourge," Elijah said quietly. "No, they won't," Morozovsky agreed. "The question is what we do about it." Around the table sat other senior officers from the services. Marshal Ivan Matveyev of the Marine Corps looked grim. Director Anna Romanova, head of Fleet Intelligence, read classified reports on her tablet. "Seraphim is 350 light-years out," Marshal Matveyev said, shaking his head. "That's outside our jurisdiction. No strategic value, and we'd be tangling with the Scourge Empire. It's suicide." Director Romanova looked up. "Whether we like it or not, the Scourge are expanding toward us. Sooner or later, they will be our problem. Maybe it's better to deal with them now on our terms." Admiral Morozovsky studied the star charts hovering above the table. Seraphim was marked in blue, ringed by the red zones that denoted Scourge space. It looked tiny and very far away. "There's another question," Morozovsky said slowly. "How did the Lumina learn about us? Our survey ships never went that far. Something or someone told them we exist." Her words sent a hush through the room. If aliens who had never met humanity knew of Earth, then human space was not as hidden as they had assumed. Other species had been watching, talking about them. Elijah cleared his throat. "With respect, Admiral, that message wasn't just a plea for help. It was a plea for mercy. These beings will die, and they know it." Morozovsky regarded him with tired eyes. "Captain, we cannot save everyone in the galaxy. We barely have enough ships to defend our own colonies." "But we could try," Elijah replied. "Send a small strike group. We might not save them all, but we could make the Scourge pay for their expansion." Silence settled again. Everyone knew the numbers. The Scourge had thousands of ships and trillions of soldiers. Humanity had roughly 300 warships and a few million trained troops. In a direct clash, humans would be utterly defeated. Marshal Matveyev was staring at something on his tablet. His expression shifted. "Maybe there's another option?" he said slowly. Admiral Morozovsky raised an eyebrow. "What option?" Matveyev swept his gaze around the table, making sure everyone present held the proper clearance. "Refuge, Program Spectre." Morozovsky's face went stone hard. A few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Spectre program was classified at the highest level. Most military people have never heard of it. The Spectres have been in stasis for 2 years, Morozovsky said quietly. They're not to be used except in the most extreme circumstances. A potential war with the Scourge seems extreme enough to me, Matveyev replied. Elijah's eyes flicked between them in confusion. What is the Spectre program? Morozovsky was silent for a long moment. Then she engaged the security locks on the chamber. Red lights flashed, and the room hermetically sealed from the rest of the base. Captain Nazarenko, she said, what I'm about to tell you is beyond your current clearance. But if we intend to do this, you must understand what it really is. She brought up new files on the holographic display. Elijah watched medical charts, psychological evaluations, and combat footage that turned his stomach. During the border wars, we created soldiers that were more than human. Genetic augmentation, cybernetic implants, psychological conditioning. They were engineered to be the perfect weapon. He stared at the floating images. The Spectres looked human, but something in their eyes was wrong. They moved too quickly, hit too hard, and showed no emotion even in the thick of battle. They won us a war, Morozovsky continued, but afterwards we realized we had made something we could not control, something no longer entirely human. Marshal Matveyev leaned forward. The Lumina asked for mercy, but what they need is not mercy. They need something to make the Scourge afraid. And the Spectres are very good at inspiring fear. Morozovsky's gaze swept the table again. If we do this, we're not sending saviors. We're sending hunters. The Lumina wanted mercy, and they will get monsters. Our own monsters. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air recycling systems. Outside, Earth turned peacefully in space, unaware that its leaders were about to unleash something dreadful on a distant star system. Elijah thought of the melodic voice that had begged across the void, asking someone to care for a dying world. He thought of the Scourge fleet approaching like locusts, and he thought of what humanity had become to survive in a galaxy of threats. When do we depart? He asked very softly. The Chimera, lunar base, sat on the moon's dark side, hidden from telescopes and curious eyes. From the outside, the facility looked like any other research station. But Captain Elijah Nazarenko now knew the truth. As his shuttle neared the landing pad, he could see defensive turrets and energy shields, protection against unwelcome guests. In the airlock, he was met by Dr. Boris Wolfson. Boris was a thin man with pale skin and nervous eyes that never seemed to settle. His uniform was perfectly pressed, but his hands trembled slightly when he spoke. "Welcome to Chimera Base, Captain Nazarenko," Boris said as they walked down the sterile white corridors. "I trust Admiral Morozovsky told you what you will see here." Elijah nodded, though he was not sure anything could prepare him. She had mentioned the Spectre program, that they were created during the border wars. Boris stopped and turned to him. "Captain, what we did here changed everything in human military doctrine. We took volunteers and turned them into something no longer entirely human. They are faster, stronger, and smarter than any ordinary person. But the cost," he shook his head, "the cost was their humanity. They rode the lift down 30 levels, passing checkpoints that scanned everything from fingerprints to brainwaves. The deeper they descended, the more Elijah felt as if he were going down into something dark and forbidden." "How many Spectres in total?" Elijah asked as they walked along another corridor of thick metal doors. 37 active units, Boris replied. "We began with over 500 volunteers. The process was not suitable for everyone." Elijah did not ask what had happened to those who didn't make it. He had a feeling he didn't want to know. They stopped before an observation window overlooking a large training hall. Inside, Elijah saw something that froze his blood. A man ran an obstacle course, but he moved unlike any human Elijah had ever seen. He was rapid, incredibly rapid. flowing from target to target like liquid death. He was tall and lean, his pale skin mapped with surgical scars. His eyes glowed with a soft amber light that was clearly artificial. He wore a simple black training suit, yet every movement was perfect, measured, and efficient. "That's Commander Kane," Boris said quietly. "Leader of Alpha Squad. He was augmented 8 years ago." Elijah watched Kane finish the course in what had to be a record time. Targets were destroyed with precision strikes, each hit placed to inflict maximal damage. But what disturbed Elijah most was Kane's face. There were no emotions, only cold concentration. "What did you do to them?" Elijah asked. Boris produced a tablet and showed medical charts and surgical logs. Genetic modifications to increase muscle density and bone strength. Cybernetic implants to speed reflexes and neural processing. Chemical therapies to enhance regeneration and reduce the need for sleep. The list went on. New organs, synthetic glands, joint replacements of advanced alloys. Elijah realized he was looking at the blueprints for turning a person into a living weapon. But the most significant changes were psychological, Boris continued. "We had to alter the chemistry of their brains so they could withstand the stress of intensified combat. As a result, they now experience emotions differently. Fear, guilt, compassion. These feelings are muted." In the training hall, Kane finished and stood perfectly still, awaiting new orders. He did not appear tired or even slightly winded. "May I speak with him?" Elijah asked. Boris hesitated. "They are different, Captain. Do not expect an ordinary conversation." A few minutes later, Elijah stood face to face with Commander Kane in a small briefing room. Up close, the augmented soldier was even more unsettling. His amber eyes tracked every micro-movement of Elijah's with predatory focus. His breathing was so controlled it was barely perceptible. "Commander Kane," Elijah said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I'm Captain Nazarenko. I understand you and your unit may be assigned to a special operation." Kane tilted his head slightly, studying Elijah as a scientist studies an interesting specimen. When he spoke, his voice was calm and devoid of feeling. "Mission parameters have not been finalized, Captain, but we are ready for deployment." "What do you know about the Scourge Empire?" Elijah asked. Kane's expression did not change, though something flickered behind his glowing eyes. "Insectoid species, martial expansionists, average height approximately 1.8 meters. Exoskeleton provides natural armor. Vulnerable points include joint articulations and respiratory openings. Standard tactic relies on overwhelming numerical superiority." The way he described potential enemies as if they were data made Elijah shudder. This was not a soldier speaking about battle. This was a predator analyzing prey. "The aliens we are trying to help are called the Lumina," Elijah said. "They are peaceful. They've never had wars." Kane nodded once. "Understood. Civilian protection protocols will be observed where tactically feasible." Where tactically feasible. Elijah heard the unsaid words between the lines. The Spectres will rescue civilians if they can, but their primary mission will always come first. Boris led Elijah to another observation area where he could see more of the augmented soldiers. Sergeant Nikita Riven was training with a weapon that seemed to appear and disappear in her hands. Her movements were fluid and silent, like those of a deadly dancer. Corporal Blake Smith worked with explosives. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to handle volatile compounds that would terrify ordinary people. A faint smile played on his lips as he worked, and somehow that smile made him even scarier than Kane's emotionless stare. Specialist Enzo Nightingale looked the youngest of the group. He was probably just over 20 before the modifications, but the same cold focus burned in his eyes as in the others. He studied tactical displays and enemy movement patterns with machine-like intensity. "How do they operate together?" Elijah asked, watching as the squad performed their synchronized exercises. Then neural implants let them exchange data in real time, Boris explained. They can communicate without words, coordinate attacks with perfect synchronization, and adapt to changing conditions faster than any normal unit. Elijah saw Cain raise his hand slightly, and 3 other augmented soldiers instantly changed positions. No words were spoken, no visible signals given. They moved like the parts of a single organism. They're no longer just soldiers, Elijah realized. There's something else, Boris nodded darkly. The Spectres were created to win humanity's wars, and they did. During the border uprising, they ended conflicts that had lasted for years. But afterward, we realized we had made something we couldn't control. What do you mean? Elijah asked. Oris brought up incident reports on his tablet. Elijah read about augmented soldiers who couldn't adapt to civilian life, who saw threats everywhere, who struggled to interact with ordinary people without triggering their combat protocols. They need to fight, Boris said quietly. That's what they were made for. Take away their missions, and they begin to break down psychologically. The stasis chambers help, but only temporarily. In the training area, the augmented squad engaged in close-quarters combat drills. They moved with speed and precision that were both beautiful and terrifying. Every strike was calculated to incapacitate or kill with maximum efficiency. What happened during the border wars? Elijah asked. Boris was silent for a long moment. The border colonies declared independence from Earth. It turned into a bloody conflict that lasted 3 years. Ordinary soldiers died by the thousands, so we created the Spectres. He activated a holographic display showing combat footage from that war. Elijah watched as the augmented soldiers cut through enemy positions like ghosts, eliminating resistance with surgical precision. They turned the tide of the war in 6 months, Boris continued. But the way they fought, that wasn't war anymore. It was extermination. The border rebels hadn't surrendered because they were defeated. They surrendered because they were terrified. Now Elijah understood why the Spectres had been sealed away on Chimera Base. They were too effective, too dangerous. They won humanity's war, Elijah said, but at the cost of becoming something ordinary people feared. And now we're about to unleash them on the Scourge. Boris nodded. The Lumina asked for mercy, but mercy won't save them from the Scourge. In the doorway appeared Cain, moving with that same unsettling, silent precision. Dr. Wolfson, the squad is ready for briefing. Elijah looked at the augmented soldier and tried to see the man he might once have been. But in those glowing amber eyes, nothing human remained. Cain was a weapon now. Nothing more, nothing less. Mission approved, said Boris to Cain. You will be deployed to the Seraphim system, hostile force, the Scourge invasion fleet. Rules of engagement are flexible. Cain nodded once. Understood, Doctor. When do we depart? Tomorrow, Boris replied. The stealth ship will carry you to the target system. After Cain left, Elijah stood in the observation area, watching the augmented soldiers prepare their gear. They moved with mechanical efficiency, checking weapons and equipment with the same emotionless focus they brought to everything else. Are we doing the right thing? Elijah asked quietly. The Scourge invasion fleet emerged in the Seraphim system like a plague of metallic locusts. Warlord Qatar watched as the beautiful blue-green world grew larger on his command display and felt a deep sense of satisfaction in his insectoid mind. This would be an easy conquest. Qatar was enormous, even for a Scourge, nearly 3 meters tall. His black exoskeleton was etched with scars from a dozen battles, and his forelimbs moved with mechanical precision as he studied the tactical displays. Behind his faceted eyes, a mind shaped by millions of years of evolution calculated the most efficient way to strip this world of its resources. Defensive platforms detected, reported his tactical officer. A smaller Scourge whose carapace still gleamed with youth. 12 orbital stations, primitive energy weapons. Qatar clicked his mandibles together, the equivalent of laughter for his kind. 12 stations against 300 ships. These Lumina are even weaker than intelligence predicted. The first wave of Scourge vessels surged toward the planet like a dark tide. Their weapons began firing long before the Lumina could mount any effective resistance. The orbital defense platforms tried to fight back. Their energy beams lashed out at the invading fleet, but it was like throwing stones into a hurricane. On the planet below, Matriarch Lyra stood in the Grand Council Hall of the capital, watching the sky burn beyond vast crystal windows. She was tall and graceful, like all of her kind. Her pale blue skin seemed almost translucent in the light. In her large, dark eyes was frozen a grief that seemed to encompass her entire dying race. "The defense platforms have been destroyed," reported Defender Valen, who among the Lumina served as something akin to a war leader. His voice trembled with fear and disbelief. All 12 stations eliminated in less than an hour. Around the council chamber, other Lumina leaders sat in stunned silence. They had known this day would come, but knowing and living it were very different things. Their peaceful civilization had no answer to such violence. "Are we still transmitting the distress signals?" Lyra asked quietly. "Yes, Matriarch," replied the communications officer. "We're broadcasting on all frequencies, but there's been no response. Either the humans haven't received our message, or they've chosen not to help." Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her people's extinction settling upon her shoulders. The Scourge would show no mercy. They never had. In a few days, perhaps only hours, the Lumina civilization would exist only as a memory. Above the planet, the first Scourge dropships began their descent. Each one carried thousands of soldiers bred for war. Their bodies, shaped by evolution and genetic manipulation, were perfect instruments of killing. They knew no fear, no mercy, and no purpose except to destroy everything in their path. Warlord Qatar watched the deployment from his flagship with cold satisfaction. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. By tomorrow, the major cities would be under Scourge control. By next week, the entire planet would be reduced to resource fields and slave camps. Not far away, within the same system, hidden in the shadow of a dead moon orbiting the Lumina homeworld, a stealth ship waited and watched. Captain Elijah Nazarenko stood on the bridge of the stealth frigate, studying the tactical displays with a mixture of horror and awe. The Scourge fleet was enormous. There were more ships than intelligence had predicted. The destruction of the Lumina defenses had been swift and merciless. "Holy God," whispered Lieutenant Kira Magpie from her station. "They're not even trying to minimize civilian casualties." On the main screen, they could see the Scourge dropships descending onto Lumina cities like falling hammers. Energy weapons lit up the night sky as the aliens began their systematic conquest. "How long until the Spectres are ready for deployment?" Elijah asked. Dr. Boris Wolfson checked his tablet. "They're already in the drop pods, running final system checks. 5 minutes, maybe less." Elijah watched as the Spectres prepared for the mission, and the sight would stay with him forever. They moved with mechanical precision, completing their pre-flight routines, checking weapons and equipment that looked more like instruments of torture than tools of war. Commander Kane briefed his team on the mission parameters. His glowing amber eyes betrayed no emotion as he outlined their objectives. Nikita Riven tested her adaptive camouflage, becoming nearly invisible even under the bright lights of the cargo bay. Blake Smith wearing that same unsettling smile, was setting up his explosives. Enzo Nightingale, coldly focused, ran diagnostics on his neural-linked weapon. They weren't going to save the Lumina. They were going to hunt the Scourge. "Sir," called the tactical officer, "I'm detecting movement in the Alpha drop zone. Scourge forces are establishing a command post on the northern continent." Elijah studied the display. Thousands of Scourge soldiers were spreading out from their dropships, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a hive. Supply lines were being established, fortifications built, and the civilian population rounded up for processing. "That's where we'll hit them," said Boris quietly. "Far from major population centers, where the Spectres can operate without worrying about civilian casualties." Through the ship's comm system, they could hear the Spectres running their final checks. Kane's voice came through clear and emotionless, reporting readiness like a machine reciting technical data. "Drop pods armed and ready for launch," he said. "All systems nominal, awaiting deployment order." Elijah looked once more at the tactical display. Below, on the planet's surface, the Scourge were already beginning their work of extermination. The Lumina were dying by the thousands. Their peaceful civilization was collapsing under the sheer weight of superior firepower. "Launch the pods," Elijah ordered softly. 4 small objects detached from the belly of the Spectre frigate, falling toward the planet like dark stars. They were coated in matte black to avoid detection, their heat signatures masked by advanced stealth systems. To Scourge sensors, they would appear as battle debris, if they were noticed at all. The pods entered the atmosphere on the planet's night side. Their trajectories were calculated to land deep in the wilderness, far from any Scourge positions. Advanced navigation systems guided them through the darkness, unseen, as they streaked toward their target zones. Inside the pods, the augmented soldiers waited with the patience of predators. Their enhanced physiology meant they felt no discomfort from the high-speed descent. There was no fear of the coming impact, only total, unwavering focus on the mission ahead. Kane's pod struck the ground first, crashing into a small forest clearing about 30 kilometers from the nearest Scourge position. The impact would have killed any ordinary human, but Kane climbed out of the smoking crater without even staggering. His enhanced senses immediately began cataloging the environment, analyzing threats and opportunities with superhuman efficiency. The Kita Riven landed 2 kilometers to the east. Her pod tore through the canopy of alien trees before embedding itself in the forest floor. She emerged from the wreckage like a specter, her adaptive camouflage already adjusting to the local terrain. The pod of Blake Smith, the demolitions expert, came down near a rocky outcrop. The blast of his landing was muffled by the natural acoustics of the canyon walls. He checked his explosive gear with the care of an artist preparing his brushes. Enzo Nightingale landed last. His pod hit a meadow filled with strange alien flowers. As he stepped into the night air, his neural-linked weapon automatically began scanning enemy communication frequencies. Within minutes, the 4 augmented soldiers were moving through the darkness toward their target. They communicated through their neural links, exchanging data and coordinating their approach without a single word. To any observer, they would have looked like shadows. Shadows with a deadly purpose. 20 kilometers away, Scourge forces were fortifying their newly conquered territory. Supply convoys moved between the landing zones, transporting equipment and prisoners. Guard posts had been established at strategic points, and command centers hummed with activity as officers planned the next phase of the invasion. Warlord Qatar reviewed the progress reports with satisfaction. Resistance had been minimal. Losses among his forces were almost non-existent. The Lumina were even weaker than expected. By this time tomorrow, the major population centers would be under complete Scourge control. But in the darkness beyond his perimeter, something was moving. Something he could not have imagined even in his worst nightmares. The augmented soldiers were approaching the Scourge positions like a disease spreading through living tissue, silent and unseen until the moment of the strike. Kane was the first to reach the outer edge of the Scourge perimeter. His enhanced vision allowed him to see the insectoid sentries moving along their patrol routes. Their chitinous forms were visible even in the darkness. He studied their movements, analyzed their blind spots, and calculated the most efficient approach vectors. Through his neural link, he shared the data with his team. Nikita Riven received targeting information for the communication systems. Blake Smith got the structural schematics of the supply depots, and Enzo Nightingale the frequency patterns of the enemy command network. The Spectres didn't just fight. They studied their enemies like scientists, learned their weaknesses like hunters, and then exploited those weaknesses with surgical precision. The first Scourge sentry died without ever realizing he was in danger. Nikita Riven slid behind him like a shadow. At dawn, the first Scourge supply convoy vanished. Centurion Grohl had been waiting for 2 hours when his communications officer reported that contact had been lost. The convoy had been carrying ammunition and medical supplies for the forward positions, traveling along a secured route between established checkpoints. "Send a patrol to investigate," Grohl ordered, his mandibles clicking irritably. The Scourge Centurion was a veteran of 7 planetary conquests. Delays like this were rare and unacceptable. The patrol found the convoy vehicles 3 kilometers from the main supply depot. The trucks were intact but empty. No bodies, no signs of battle, no indication of what had happened to the 40 Scourge soldiers who should have been aboard. What the patrol did find made even the hardened warriors of the Scourge recoil in fear. The missing soldiers had been arranged in a perfect circle around the lead transport. Their bodies were positioned with mathematical precision, each one facing outward, as if standing guard. But they were all dead, killed with such efficiency that most showed no signs of struggle. "How were they killed?" Grohl demanded, as the patrol commander delivered his report. The officer, a young Scourge whose exoskeleton still bore the bright markings of youth, struggled for words. "We can't say, sir. No weapon traces, no burns. They just stopped functioning." What the Scourge didn't understand was that Nikita Riven had done the job in under 5 minutes. Her enhanced reflexes let her move faster than their eyes could follow, and her modified hands struck with precision that turned their own exoskeletons against them. A single touch to the right neural junction could shut down a Scourge nervous system instantly. The Spectres weren't just killing Scourge soldiers. They were sending messages. That same day, a watch post on the eastern perimeter went silent during a scheduled check-in. When the replacement shift arrived, they found the outpost completely intact. All the equipment was undamaged. All the weapons were still on their racks. All the supplies were untouched. The guards were gone. 2 hours later, a Scourge patrol found them. 12 soldiers had been arranged in a complex geometric pattern in a clearing half a kilometer from their post. The design meant nothing to the Scourge mind, but it stirred deep, primal fears, echoes of instincts their species carried since the age when they were mere insects hiding from predators. Blake Smith had spent considerable time crafting that pattern. His enhanced mind understood the psychological power of perfect symmetry, how certain shapes and angles could evoke fear responses across different species. He was turning killing into art. Warlord Qatar received the reports aboard his command ship with growing unease. 2 incidents could have been coincidence, a systems failure, perhaps, or some local contagion affecting his troops. But the arranged bodies pointed to something far more deliberate. Intensify patrols, he ordered his staff. Double security at every installation and deploy search and destroy teams to find whatever's responsible. But Qatar's hunters were about to become the hunted. Enzo Nightingale intercepted the general's orders through the Scourge communication network. His neural-linked weapon had fully penetrated their command structure, allowing him to track every transmission, every order, every report. He knew where the search teams would deploy long before they even left their bases. The first team consisted of 20 elite Scourge soldiers, specially trained hunters, bred to seek and destroy threats. They moved through the forest in perfect formation, their heightened senses scanning for any sign of an enemy. These were not common troops, they were the Scourge equivalent of special forces. They never saw Commander Kane coming. Kane had been observing them for nearly an hour, studying their movement patterns and tactical procedures. His enhanced vision tracked them effortlessly in total darkness, and his modified nervous system allowed him to move without a sound. The attack lasted 30 seconds. Kane passed through the Scourge formation like death itself. His accelerated reflexes let him strike multiple targets before any of them could react. His modified hands could pierce their exoskeletons as easily as a human might tear paper. When it was over, 20 elite Scourge warriors lay dead in the forest, but Kane didn't arrange them into patterns as the others had done. He left them where they fell, scattered and broken. The message was clear. Even their best soldiers meant nothing to him. By the third day, panic was spreading through the Scourge invasion force. Convoys now traveled only in large formations with heavy escorts. Outposts were reinforced and maintained constant communication checks. Patrols moved in tight formations designed to prevent ambushes. None of it mattered. The Spectres adapted to every countermeasure faster than the Scourge could implement them. When the aliens increased patrol numbers, Nikita Riven simply waited for larger groups to annihilate. When they upgraded their communication protocols, Enzo Nightingale found new ways to infiltrate their networks. When they fortified their positions, Blake Smith devised ever more creative ways to destroy them. But the psychological warfare was having an even greater effect than the direct assaults. The Scourge were a hive-born species, creatures evolved from insectoid colonies. They were accustomed to facing enemies who fought in predictable patterns, enemies who could be overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. They had never faced anything like the Spectres. Reports began coming in from across the invasion zone. A supply depot was destroyed by explosions that originated from inside the building, caused by devices no one had seen being planted. Watch posts found completely empty, their occupants gone without any sign of struggle or alarm. Communication systems disabled by infiltrations that left no trace in the security logs. Scourge soldiers began to fear the dark. They stayed close together, flinched at shadows, and reported threats that investigation teams could never verify. The once efficient war machine, the same force that had conquered dozens of worlds, was slowly coming apart under the pressure of fighting an enemy they could neither see nor understand. Centurion Grohl now commanded a supply base that had lost half its personnel. In just 5 days, soldiers had simply vanished during routine duties, leaving behind only their equipment and a growing sense of fear among the survivors. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we're receiving reports from every sector. The pattern is the same everywhere. Small units disappearing, installations destroyed, communication networks are being hacked." Grohl, stared at the tactical displays in mounting horror. Red markers indicating lost units formed a pattern that was tightening around the main Scourge positions like a noose. What kind of enemy could do this? The Centurion muttered under his breath. His question was answered that same night when Blake Smith came to visit the supply base. The augmented soldier moved toward the installation like a predator studying its prey. His enhanced senses helped him map every defensive position, every patrol route, every weakness in their security. The Scourge had built the base according to standard military doctrine, which made it painfully predictable. Blake Smith did not assault the base directly. First, he disabled perimeter sensors in ways that produced blind spots in their detection grid. The guards knew something was wrong, but could not find the fault. Fear spread as troops began reporting movement in zones their sensors showed as clear. Then he started manipulating their communications. Messages began to come in, purportedly from missing units. Transmissions cut out at critical moments, and emergency alarms went off for no observable reason. Scourge soldiers started losing faith in their own equipment. Finally, he began visiting the guards themselves. Blake Smith appeared just long enough for a sentry to glimpse motion, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. He left small objects in places where the guards would find them, belongings of the missing soldiers. He produced sounds that seemed to come from empty corridors and shadows that moved when nothing should have moved. Within 48 hours, the supply base had descended into chaos. Soldiers refused to stand watch alone. Officers could not trust their own reports, and the entire facility was paralyzed by fear of an enemy they had never truly seen. Centurion Grohl finally requested permission to abandon the base, reporting that his position was no longer defensible. But Warlord Qatar's response was swift and furious. "Retreat is unacceptable," the general transmitted. "You are Scourge warriors, not frightened insects. Hold your positions and destroy these threats." Yet even Qatar's flagship was beginning to experience troubles of its own. For 2 days, Nikita Riven studied the massive Scourge command ship, memorizing its layout and security procedures. Her adaptive camouflage allowed her to move through the vessel like a ghost, invisible to both sensors and organic eyes. She didn't attack the ship's crew directly. Instead, she began sabotaging systems in ways designed to create maximum confusion. The navigation computers started producing mysterious errors. Life support systems fluctuated without explanation. Security cameras began displaying footage of empty corridors, rooms where motion sensors detected nothing at all. The ship's officers soon found themselves chasing a cascade of technical malfunctions that seemed to multiply faster than they could fix them. The Scourge forces had gathered in their primary landing zone like wounded animals seeking shelter. Warlord Qatar watched from his command ship as thousands of his soldiers retreated from positions across the continent, abandoning their conquests to huddle together in what they hoped would be a safe haven. The landing zone covered 50 square kilometers of plains near the Lumina capital. Massive defensive walls surrounded the perimeter. Energy shields hummed with power, and automated weapon systems tracked every shadow beyond the fortifications. If there was anywhere the Scourge could make a stand against their invisible enemy, this was it. Qatar studied the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. Whatever had been hunting his forces would now have to reveal itself, and the concentrated firepower of his remaining troops would annihilate any threat daring to approach their stronghold. Status report. The general ordered. Centurion Grohl, his hands trembling, consulted his datapad. Cracks marred the officer's exoskeleton. stress fractures from days of unrelenting fear. 15,000 soldiers within the perimeter, sir. All heavy weapons operational, shields at full capacity, and aerial patrols are maintaining constant surveillance. It sounded impressive, but Qatar knew the truth behind the numbers. He had begun the invasion with nearly 80,000 troops. In just 1 week, something had reduced his army to less than a fifth of its strength, without a single open engagement. But surely, this nightmare was nearly over. No enemy, no matter how skilled, could breach such overwhelming defenses. 3 kilometers away, hidden among the ruins of a Lumina observatory, Commander Kane observed the Scourge fortifications through his enhanced vision that allowed him to see every detail with perfect clarity. His amber eyes betrayed no emotion as he studied the defensive layout, calculating angles of attack and identifying weak points. Through his neural link, he transmitted tactical data to his team. Nikita Riven was positioned on the eastern approach, her adaptive camouflage, rendering her invisible amid the shattered remains of the city. Blake Smith had found an ideal vantage point to the south, where the damaged buildings offered both cover and elevated firing positions. Enzo Nightingale remained mobile, his electronic warfare suite already penetrating the Scourge communication networks. The Spectres had spent 3 days preparing for this final assault. They had mapped every defense system, identified every patrol route, and calculated the precise timing required for maximum efficiency. This would not be a battle in the traditional sense. It would be a surgical removal of a malignant growth. Kane's augmented mind processed thousands of tactical variables in seconds. The Scourge had built their fortress to withstand conventional assaults, but they still fought like insects. They expected enemies to approach from predictable directions, to reveal themselves through obvious maneuvers, to fight by rules they could understand. They were about to learn that humanity had evolved beyond such limits. The attack began at midnight. Enzo Nightingale struck first. His neuro-linked weapon triggered cascading failures in the Scourge computer systems. Defensive grids powered down in meticulously planned sequences, creating temporary blind zones in their sensor coverage. Communication networks suffered selective outages, isolating different sections of the base from one another. To Scourge technicians, it appeared as random equipment malfunctions. They could not have known that every error was perfectly timed and flawlessly coordinated. Blake Smith moved through the chaos like a phantom. His charges were planted with surgical precision at structurally weak points throughout the fortifications. When they detonated, the explosions would create maximum psychological impact while opening key breach points for his teammates. Nikita Riven flowed through the defensive perimeter like a liquid shadow. Her enhanced reflexes allowed her to move between patrol routes with perfect timing, while her adaptive camouflage made her invisible even to the Scourge's heightened senses. She eliminated sentries with cold, surgical precision, each kill designed to instill fear without triggering an immediate alarm. Kane waited until his team had weakened the defenses, then began his advance toward the command center. He moved through the Scourge positions like death incarnate, his enhanced physiology allowing him to endure weapons fire that would have torn ordinary humans apart. The first sign that something was wrong was the explosion of a watchtower lighting up the night sky. Then another tower vanished in a blast that shook the ground beneath the Scourge soldiers' feet. Within minutes, detonations erupted all across the base as Blake Smith's precisely planted charges went off in a carefully timed sequence. But the explosions were only the beginning. As the Scourge troops scrambled to respond to what appeared to be sabotage, they encountered something far worse than bombs. Nikita Riven moved through their ranks like a harvesting machine. Her enhanced reflexes allowed her to kill multiple targets before an alarm could even be raised. Those who survived her attacks faced an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, striking from impossible angles with weapons they couldn't even identify. Their thick exoskeletons, designed to withstand conventional weapons, offered no protection against her modified hands. Centurion Groll tried to coordinate a response from his command bunker, but his communication systems kept failing at critical moments. Orders were sent, only to be cut off mid-transmission. Reports came in, filled with impossible claims, describing an enemy that moved too fast to track and struck with incredible precision. "Sir," said the communications officer, his voice trembling with terror, "we're receiving reports of multiple breaches. The enemy appears to be everywhere at once." Groll stared at his tactical displays, but the data made no sense. His troops were reporting attacks from all directions simultaneously, as if they were facing an entire army, not the small strike team he knew was hunting them. The truth was that 4 augmented soldiers could accomplish more than most armies. They moved with flawless coordination, each one supporting the others in ways that multiplied their collective effectiveness. They weren't just fighting, they were dissecting the enemy with surgical precision. Warlord Qatar watched in growing horror from his command ship as his fortifications collapsed. His monitors showed explosions and chaos, but revealed no clear image of the enemy causing it. Reports from the field described attackers moving faster than the eye could follow and striking with impossible accuracy. "Deploy all reserves," he ordered desperately. "Concentrate everything on the command bunker. We'll hold there." But Kane was already inside the bunker. The augmented soldier had infiltrated the most heavily guarded structure in the Scourge stronghold by walking straight through the front entrance. His adaptive armor had fooled their sensors long enough for him to reach the inner chambers, and his enhanced reflexes allowed him to eliminate the guards before they could sound the alarm. Centurion Groll turned and saw a figure standing in the doorway of his command center. For a moment, his insectoid mind couldn't process what it was seeing. The intruder looked almost human, but his eyes glowed amber, and his movements carried a predatory grace that awakened every primal fear the Scourge had ever known. "What are you?" Groll whispered. Kane tilted his head slightly, studying the alien officer like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. When he spoke, his voice held no emotion, no anger, nothing to suggest he saw the Scourge as anything more than an obstacle to be removed. "I am what humanity becomes when mercy is no longer enough," he said softly. The bunker fell silent, save for the distant sounds of destruction as Kane's teammates completed their systematic eradication of the Scourge forces. Within days, 80,000 alien soldiers had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing in terror toward their dropships. Warlord Qatar made the only decision that could save what remained of his invasion force. He ordered an immediate evacuation, abandoning the conquest of Seraphima to save his ships from the nightmares humanity had unleashed. As the Scourge fleet retreated into space, carrying with it reports that would spread through their empire like wildfire, the augmented soldiers gathered among the ruins of the alien stronghold. Their mission was complete, yet their enhanced senses registered no satisfaction in victory. 3 days later, Matriarch Lyra emerged from the underground shelters where her people had hidden during the invasion. The leader of the Lumina walked through her devastated capital, witnessing the scars left by the brief but brutal occupation. But the Scourge were gone, driven off by some unimaginable force. Her people were saved. She found Kane waiting for her in the ruins of the council hall. His glowing amber eyes reflected no warmth, despite the salvation he had brought. The augmented soldier stood utterly still, like a weapon awaiting its next command. "I was told you asked for mercy," Kane said. His voice carried a restrained edge of violence that made the peaceful Lumina instinctively step back. "But mercy wasn't what you needed. You needed monsters, and we sent monsters." Lyra looked at the man who had saved her people, struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. In those amber eyes was intelligence, but also something cold, mechanical, and utterly devoid of life. "What have you become?" she whispered.